when we made a top years ago, what did we finish off the neckline with? A facing. You can say goodbye to facings. You don't want a floppy facing in a knit garment. This is a top I made years ago. I've had to restitch it numerous times. I think I had hold of cotton thread. But you see this facing flopping around in there? No need for a facing. Just take that off your knit sewing list. Bye. Instead, we're going to do what I have developed called my Snappy Clean Finish. Snappy. Just a little bit of turn under here. It's got clear elastic in it. Perhaps you've met the animal clear elastic. Perhaps you didn't like it. Perhaps you had rotten clear elastic. My friend Emma explained it to me. Clear elastic rots when it is exposed to light. How is clear elastic sold in the chain stores? In a blister pack hanging on the wall with the lights on all day, perhaps all night. And if you got the package that's been hanging at the front of the hook, this is probably what happened. It was rotten. So when you tried putting it in your garment, do you see? You could tear it. It breaks. You wouldn't want to use that in your garment. So if that was your experience with clear elastic, I've got news for you. You've already learned it. You let light, or you didn't, the store let light attack this, so it's rotten. The other thing with clear elastic is you always want to have it totally encased within the garment, because obviously it's plastic, and if your iron meets clear elastic, you're going to have a melted mess. So it's always going to be encased. But this is the secret. Now, I tested lots and lots of commercial products to find one that I liked. This is 3/8 of an inch wide, and it's got just hard enough of an edge on it. I love this one. I get it in 50-pound bags, and every time my husband and I go someplace, I'm sitting there measuring off 5 yards, a little more for the excess, to make sure you get 5 yards, and I sit there and I wrap it on these cards for you. And then we fold it up in this wrapper and put it in the package. So that's how you get lasting, clear elastic. Best thing since sliced bread. You're going to love it. If you take time to practice these techniques, perfect it for your machine, you also can have a snappy clean finish. Let's think back to quickly what we just learned. Remember about the clipping, the necklines? So do you see here, this one's already done. I just wanted to show this to you. Clipped, this can turn in for sleeveless, clipped, seam allowance press the opposite direction, and the last in there, zigzag to the seam allowance on the wrong side with this side of the last in right along your seam line. Then do you see what's going to happen is it's going to flip in, and then you are going to zigzag, twin needle, or cover hem. If you did the cover hem or the twin needle, it would then look like this. Snappy finish. Here it is on the back of this. Now, when you look at it, it looks a little bit puckered, but believe me, when that gets on my body, it stretches out, it hugs my body, and it's a beautiful back neckline finish. You're going to love lasting. Now, when you put it on, your machine and the foot that you use is going to make a difference. I was sewing on my good old Pfaff here for years, and I had perfected this technique, but then when I have the pleasure of sewing on this brand new Brother machine, everything changed. Everything didn't work quite the same. But I think that was a gift from the Lord, because it really helped me appreciate the fact that just because a technique works on a certain machine with certain features doesn't mean that that same technique is going to work the same on the machine that you're working on. So now I've got both a machine with the integrated dual feed, I'll talk more about in just a minute, with a bobbin in a case that rides vertical, and I have a machine where I can adjust the pressure on the presser foot, and I have a top drop-in bobbin. So between those two types of machines, I know that I've got basically all the features of machines covered, which is a great thing. Here's what happened when I did the technique that I had perfected on my Pfaff with the dual feed engaged. This gizmo right here, Pfaff invented it, and Bernina has it now as well. It's called integrated dual feed. what it does is it gives you feed dogs on the top as well as the bottom. What you need to contend with as you're sewing is that you've got the feed dogs on the bottom pulling the fabric through and pressure on the top so the top scooches along ahead, and that's where you get the diagonal pulls and problems when you're stitching hems. So if you engage the dual feed, and I'll show you some samples later, it's going to help feed the fabric at a simultaneous rate. It's best known for matching plaids without that scooch along of the top ahead of the bottom. The other thing that you can use is the walking foot. The walking foot is a great tool that also puts the feed dogs on the top as well as the bottom. A lot of quilters use them. I know my friend Marcy and Catherine Tilton really like to use the walking foot as they sew on their knits, and I would really agree. I was zigzagging it on with just a slight tug on the elastin as I put it, and I ended up with far, far too much puckers. That turned in top stitch is still going to be too much. It's going to be too tight. All right? So I knew that wasn't going to work. Now when I did this stitching, I had on my regular presser foot, the presser foot that's completely flat on the back. You may not know this, but there is a huge difference between this presser foot and this one. This presser foot has a groove on the back side. This is your embroidery foot. This is the foot that you use when you're doing machine embroidery where you build up a little mountain of thread. You have to have a tunnel on the bottom of your foot so that the mountain of thread can feed in through the tunnel. Does that make sense? So this foot used actually reduces the pressure that's being exerted on the elastic on top of the fabric. Using the technique that I had perfected of putting just a little tug on the elastin as I zigzagged it on with my FOF with the integrated dual feed and the regular presser foot, I came up with the perfect result. But when I did that on my brother, it was too puckered. This was with the regular presser foot. Then I started playing around with adjusting the pressure on the presser foot within the settings of my machine, and I couldn't really come up with the exact thing that I wanted doing that either. When I changed to my decorative stitch foot, the embroidery stitch foot, and I just laid it on there with the pressure at its default setting of 3, that wasn't enough tug, but at least I had gotten rid of all that excess pressure stretching out the elastic as I was putting it on. So I determined what I needed to do then was, in using the decorative stitch foot, going back to my original technique of tugging just a little bit in front of the needle and zigzagging it, I got just the perfect amount of pull on the elastin to create the neckline snappy finish that I wanted to do. I'm going to show you next that technique as I sew on the sewing machine. Now I'm going to actually show you how I actually do that little tug in front of the elastin as I zigzag it on to the wrong side of the seam allowance for my snappy, clean neckline finish. You always want to get plenty of elastin behind the presser foot when you start. Now remember, we've got on the embroidery presser foot, so that has decreased the amount of pressure. I have not adjusted the pressure on my machine at all. I have set it on a great big fat wide long zigzag. So get started, and then it's just a very, very, very slight tug on that elastin in front of the needle. That's it. Get yourself some straight pieces of fabric and practice. It would be well worth even an hour of your practice to perfect this technique. It's just a slight little tug. If you have to err on one side or the other, I'd say go for less tug rather than too much. And I'll make you a bet you will start with too much tug. You don't want too much tug. Just a little tug so that when you've put it on, it doesn't look this tugged. It doesn't look just flat, but instead it has just a slight little gather to it. Because then what's going to happen at the proper time in the sewing sequence, which in my patterns I've got all figured out for you, you're going to thread up with your twin needle, turn that in, and twin needle that edge, or use your cover hem machine. But I do that all in one step. I wouldn't do this last step until I'm actually doing the hems. So I only have to thread up my twin needle one time.